Of the 5th New York Volunteer Infantry reenactment, and Albert was a member of that unit.
Good morning. My name is Bill Winnicky. As was just stated, I'm a reenactor with the 5th New York. I'm also a social studies teacher at the Summers Middle School for my students. They're with me today from our Living History Club on this special occasion. The 5th New York, known as Duryea Zouaves, was recruited in New York City and mustered into service at Fort Schuyler, New York Harbor in May of 1861. Albert Silleck enlisted into the 5th July 20th, 1861, and was mustered in as a private into Company K 2 days later to serve a 3-year service. The 5th New York Volunteer Infantry, Duryea Zouaves, was one of the most renowned fighting regiments of the American Civil War. Their colorful Zouave uniforms, precise maneuvers, effectiveness in combat, and steady bearing under fire won them universal respect and recognition. Many observers consider the 5th New York to be the best drilled volunteer unit in the Federal Army. General George Sykes, whose division of regular Army troops the 5th was connected to, wrote, "I doubt whether it had an equal, certainly no superior among the regiments of the Army of the Potomac." In addition to a casualty list that totaled 211 dead out of 1,508 men born on the rolls of the Zouaves, 9 of its soldiers would attain the rank of general. It was certainly a regiment of note. 13 months after the Union's failed attempt to take Richmond ended in defeat at the First Battle of Bull Run, Union and Confederate forces would meet once more on that battlefield in what would become simply known as Second Bull Run, fought on August 28th to 30th, 1862. The 5th New York Volunteer Regiment would take part in that fight. On the 3rd day of fighting, due to a major tactical error, the Union flank was left dangerously exposed along Ching Ridge. Confederate Commander James Longstreet, commanding 25,000 Confederate troops, would oppose 1,200 Federal troops, which included the 500 men of the 5th New York. It would be commanded by a 26-year-old Cleveland Winslow. Albert would be a part of that unit. That day was a particularly quiet one for the 5th. They were accustomed to being in the middle of the fray, though that would change very soon. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, the battlefield was relatively peaceful. The Zouaves were relaxed, their guns were stacked. Shortly after 4 p.m., Longstreet ordered his Texas Brigade under General Hood to move. Hood's men advanced from its wooded cover and started forward in a line extending 700 yards. For the men of the 5th, the first warning was a rustle in the wooded area just beyond their position. "Attention battalion," yelled Captain Winslow. The New Yorkers quickly grabbed their muskets and expertly fell into line. The still unseen Confederates pelted the line with bullets. There was a moment's stillness. Then, bang, 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 wrote Private Andrew Coates. Then came a volley, a devastating volley. The bullets ripping through the foliage sounded like an immense flock of partridges. The balls began to fly from the woods like hail, according to the accounts of Albert Davenport. It was a continual hiss, whiz, and sluck, the sluck being the sound of bullets ripping through the men. Dozens of men tumbled in the fire. Twice the regimental colors fell. Most of the color guard was shot. The state flag fell into Confederate hands. Sergeant Albion carried the national colors, and seeing that he and the colors were about to be captured, Alexander tore the banner from the staff and tucked the banner in his shirt. By the time the front of the 5th was cleared of Union soldiers of 10 skirmishers, Hood's Confederate line stood only 40 yards from the 5th New York. In the first 2 minutes, the 5th lost probably 100 men. It was a sickening spectacle. Not only were the men wounded or killed, said Private Coates, but they were riddled. Warren could see that the brigade had no chance in their position and ordered a retreat. But in the roar of the musket fire, most of the men could not hear the order. Behind Davenport, what was left of the color guard moved from the field. Frank Spellman was their color guard. As they moved from the field, he was ripped with several shots. His concern more for the flag than his life, he called to his tent mate, "Chambers, for God's sake, take the flag," he yelled. And he handed off the flag before it would hit the ground. Later that day, Spellman would be dead. "40 minutes before, the 5th New York counted 500 men under that flag. Now it mustered just 60. Some of the regiment would return, but most of them were dead, dying, and wounded, scattered in the blood-stained field. The scene was a slaughter, a ghastly, horrifying spectacle. During those 10 awful minutes atop the ridge, the 5th New York lost nearly 300 men. 120 shot and mortally killed. For a single infantry regiment, it was the highest casualty rate of any federal infantry unit in the entire war. 45 years later, when they gathered in that place to erect a monument in memory of those men, it was said by one of the men that war has been designated as hell, and I can assure you that where the regiment stood that day was the very vortex of hell. Albert Silleck of Duryea-Zuez, 5th New York, would die this day in this terrible fight, just 20 years, 6 months, and 16 days of age. 13 months later, on another great battlefield of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln would speak the words of his famed Gettysburg Address. And as we hear these words echo across the hallowed ground of this nation, which still speaks to us today, we recall those words. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives for that nation might live. He went on to say, it is for us the living rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus so far nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. Today we honor the life and sacrifice of Albert Silleck, a young man who indeed advanced the cause of freedom and in fact gave the last full measure of devotion, giving his life that this union might live on. May we never forget what he did, the price he paid for freedom, our freedom, and may we rededicate ourselves to the great task that remains before us, to continue the necessary work, enduring in the ongoing struggle to maintain our freedom so that it may never perish from this earth. May God give Albert eternal rest, and may God give us the strength to endure in the work that remains, and may we continue to bless, and may he continue to bless the United States of America.
Only a soldier's grave, for soldiers, like other mortals, die. Parents had he, they were far away. No sister weeps over the soldier's play. A brother comes with tearful eye, it's only a soldier's grave. True he was living, true he was loving, and young and brave. No glowing epitaph honors his grave. No proud recital or virtues known, of grief endured, or triumphs won. No tablet of marble or obelisk high, only a soldier's grave. Yet bravely he wielded his sword to fight, and gave his life in a cause of right. When his hope was high, and his youthful tree as warm as sunlight on yonder stream, his heart unvexed by sorrow and song. Yet it's only a soldier's grave. Girls, would you read that? Present on. coming. The Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, and Girl Scouts, they will be placing the flags on. There are 21 Civil War soldiers buried here, and 18 Revolutionary War soldiers buried here. And they're all marked if you'd like to walk around and see the headstones. So thank you again, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts. We also will put flags on the cemetery across where there's about 75 veterans buried over there. Thank you very much.